And welcome back to Frankly Speaking in conjunction with Mehi Rain. Joining me on the line tonight is my good friend Julian DeMarco. How are you, buddy?
Doing well.
Great to have you back here, Julian. And tonight, Julian, we got an interesting topic. One of the big things that's been talked about a lot about by many different pundits, guys like Bill Maher and a few other out there, is this talk about a amicable divorce between the left and the right in America, particularly between the blue states and the red states. It looks like that the divisions in America are so deep, so hostile now that really Americans can't live with each other, at least Americans of different ideological spectrums, right? When we talk about that left and right dichotomy. And I find that very interesting because one, I think, Julian, we have to try and speculate at the very least to see what a division between the right and the left and red states and blue states would look like, which I find problematic. But I think the bigger problem is this. We've been very critical here, frankly speaking, Knights of Christendom and your site, about Western liberalism and the collapse that's really been happening since the Enlightenment and the Protestant Reformation. I think we've come full circle with the really, listen, there's this dark cloud over the West right now. We all feel it. We all sense it. The culture is rotten to the core. The political system is corrupt as can be. The family is in a state of just absolute ruination now. And now we're getting to a point as Americans, we cannot coexist with each other anymore. The right and the left are saying we need this divorce from one another. I'm going to ask you flat out, if something like this were to happen, which I doubt it's going to happen because the left is not going to let anybody off the hook. But if it were to come down to an actual divorce, a peaceful divorce, right? Can we pretty much declare the founding of America dead?
Well, I think the founding of America was dead on arrival. I mean, whether it's this past election or Trump getting elected or Obama getting elected or Bush getting elected, Bush 1, Reagan, anyone before Reagan, I think this country has collapsed a long time ago before myself or even you were born. And we have been living on fumes. I mean, the Roman Republic, before it turned into an empire, lasted 500 years. And the decay for the Republic before it turned into the Caesar monarchy, I would say it took about 100 years till it turned into the Caesar monarchy. But it wasn't so rapid. The thing about now with countries collapsing, particularly like America, is that ourselves, what we are doing right here, and the talking classes are constantly talking about what is going on. Back then, when other countries collapsed, when you didn't have talking heads or constant 24-hour media circus, you couldn't really see the collapse coming because there wasn't constant people talking about it. There were people writing about it. You had chroniclers and scribers and stuff like that, but I think one of the reasons why it seems so pronounced now is just because we document everything nowadays, unlike the past. But long story short, to answer your question, yes, because I think people try and sugarcoat the collapse by saying that America is changing into something else.
Yeah.
Whether it collapses or changing into something else, it still has collapsed. What if America is one thing and then it changes into something else that is completely unrecognizable from what it was? Is that not a collapse?
Yeah, see, that's the big question here, right? We're kind of going to be debating definitions of what is a collapse, what isn't a collapse. But I agree with you because the country looks nothing like it did, not just 230, 240 years ago. It looks nothing like it did just 20 years ago, to be honest with you, specifically, in the culture. and with the decimation of the family. I mean, the past 50, 60 years have just been, well, just devastating on those institutions, family and culture. I guess the big question, I think when we look at it from the political right, there's a sense of sheer panic because government has grown and grown and grown. And now, whether it's with mandates or whether it's with sort of their government's alliance with corporations or whatever it may be, an election that many are calling into question still, the right seems to be lost and hopeless at this point because they have no political ramifications to kind of go back and fix some of these problems. It's like I've been saying for the longest time, Julian, pick your date. 1776, 1789, the Civil War, FDR, the 1960s. When did America collapse? Because it's been going progressively to the left since any one of those dates. Like I said, I would argue probably 1789 when the Constitution was formed. It most likely is when it started going to the left. And there's never no regulating back, even when we get Republicans in power, even when we get, supposed conservative Supreme Court nominees up on the courts, it always goes to the left. But I think,
I mean, wasn't under Bush second, Bush two, wasn't it? Didn't Vermont and Hawaii or some other states legalize sodomy marriage, or at least legalize civil unions? I mean, so again, it doesn't matter if it's Trump or Bush,
right,
or whatever conservative you want. The country keeps going left.
Yeah, I think under Bush, you're talking about the early 2000s.
Yes.
I know in the 2004 campaign, when he faced off against John Kerry, the country was still against, again, LGBT marriage, gay marriage, whatever you want to call it. And the Bush administration used propositions on individual state ballots to get Christians to come out in order to help Bush get him over the finish line in 2004. I remember that. But the shift was already starting toward accepting that institution, I guess, if you want to say that. But my big issue right now is, Julian, as I talk to many classical liberals, they see the world around us really sort of closing in, the corrupt elements, whether you want to call the governments, the corporations, whatever you may be, this big liberal faction all over the world, call it the New World Order, call it whatever you want to call it now. And I'm having Americans, everyday conservatives, who at one time were rah, 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 we're Americans, we're number one, we bleed red, white, and blue, we're the greatest country in the history of the world. And I was told by a friend of mine today, he told me, Frank, I don't even know that I can say that America is not an evil country anymore. Specifically with all the mandates and things like that that's going on. What I'm saying to you, Julian, there's been a major shift on the political right that's starting to see that, the supposed goodness of America, the things we've stood for, it's all been wiped out in that sense. And there's a real genuine fear that we cannot coexist anymore with the left. When you look at a Looney Tune state like California, where I was born and raised in, I don't know how we make this relationship work. And I understand where the right is coming from, but in practical terms, can this ever truly happen? Can a division, an amicable division, divorce, as they're talking about, how practical is it, Julian?
It's impractical because Lincoln has already settled this question during the Second Civil War. A million Yankees said when the South seceded, you can't do that, and have that the question has been settled. So I don't understand what are we talking about here? What are these conservatives talking about? Because it has been settled.
Yeah.
So and to answer your friend's question, is America good? I would say, and I would take it even further, is any country in the West good? I mean, even countries that I love, are any countries good? I mean, wholesale baby murder, homosexuals in not only in positions of power, but outright tyranny and bullying, a very small, disordered minority telling the majority of normal people what is good and what is not, and then demanding that they be celebrated and demanding that they have all of these things that they believe they should have based on the sole fact that they exist. And, you know, this country ships it out and puts it
Yeah,
all
well,
in other countries, and, you know, other countries kind of can say they've done the same thing, but not on the scale of the USA. So, you know,
well, Julian,
what
what I would
is so
say to that,
how is the West, most Western countries, good? I would say that no Western country is good, especially when you are killing your own population,
yeah,
your own
yeah,
population that cannot defend itself.
yeah, Julian. It's like I've said so many times before. When you look at America, um, it has endorsed, legalized, legislated, funded, celebrated, shipped overseas every mortal sin ever condemned by our ancestors. Every single one. There's not one that we actually stand up to anymore and say, okay, this is wrong. Listen, you know, when my friend asked me that today, I was thrown back by it because I know how much he loves his country, America. And I do too. Don't get me wrong. Listen, we all have something at stake here. You know, I've said it before. I was born here. I'm going to raise a family here. I'm going to die and be buried in this country. And we all have something at stake, and we all want some kind of hope in the end, right? Especially if you're raising a family. But you know, Julian, we need to be honest with ourselves first and foremost with America. Something has gone wrong here, right? I think the problem that our friends on the right have, and we'll talk about our friends on the left too, but the problem our friends on the right have is that they have never been able to separate their ideological sort of beliefs of what America was at the origins with what's on the ground and what's happening on the ground, and how these ideological principles have really contributed toward what is happening in America today. That's why I asked you, you know, at the beginning of this, if we go through this divorce of sorts, if we're allowed to peacefully leave, which is not going to happen, but I'm just speculating here, does that mean the founding of the country was flawed from the origin? Because that's what it seems like to me, Julian.
I would say definitively yes. It is, as I've said multiple times on video, in person, and I'm not the only one that has said this. You know, other people have said this too. Um, the seeds of America's destruction are built into its founding. So it was always a doomed experiment from the start. It has always been a political oddity that has been doomed from the start.
Yeah.
I don't know any republic that is successful that hasn't collapsed under its own weight.
Yeah, I think,
America has had a long, continuous. You know, I wouldn't even say that. I mean, the second Civil War, which everybody knows apparently as the first Civil War, the American Civil War, is is a is a is a fact that America was already a failed state, and America barely even when the whole thing with Lincoln went down. That was not even 100 years.
yeah, I think it was roughly 70, 75 years, right around there. That's where Timothy Gordon in his book, Catholic Republic, would say that everything in America was just fine up until the Civil War. And then Lincoln implements the 14th Amendment. And as a tyrant, he essentially destroys the Republic. And I guess my argument to that is, well, okay, but in order to get us to a point of a civil war, at what point does America start falling apart prior to the Civil War? Was it 5 years? Was it 10 years? Because you had a lead up to the Civil War at some time. That's why I say, I mean, if we're going to use this one grain of sand in the hourglass of history to justify for how long America worked for, well, good luck with that, because it's not a very long history. It's very short. I mean, the question is, did it ever
It's a
work?
lifespan.
I'm sorry?
It's a lifespan.
Yeah.
If it's 70 years, that could be the lifespan of somebody. If it worked for 70 years, that's a lifespan for somebody.
Yeah.
That's not a good track record.
Right. Right. And so I think when we look at it from the standpoint of the left, because if you look at the polling right now, 52% of Trump supporters want this divorce from the left, and 41% of, I guess, Biden supporters want the divorce from the right in America. And I find that interesting because maybe we're just not going far enough or fast enough for our progressive friends over here. But it's like I keep saying, I don't know what the rush is. They've won every major battle that has come down the pipe since the founding of the republic. America's been going to the far left. All they got to do is be patient, and they're going to get their leftist utopia. We're on a road there, right, Julian?
Well, yeah, I think it's just that they want to live in an echo chamber, and they just don't want to have to live with people who are not of the same opinions of them. And
Right.
so if it not only is this impractical, how is it going to come about? Like how will it look? Who's deciding this? Who gets what state? Do states become individual countries? Do these blue states just become one giant country? Are they going to be connected to each other? Are we going to have like borders crisscrossing through states? Like what's going on? How is this going to work? And again, like you said, it's just, well, why do you want the divorce? You guys have control of everything. Okay, so every 4 years or 8 years, you don't have control of the White House or the Senate or the Congress. Well, what does it matter? You get everything you want, even when the White House is and the Congress and the Senate and the majority of governors are Republican. I remember when Trump got elected, it was like red across the whole entire country. The White House was red. The Congress was red. The Senate was red. The majority of people in, all the states and the local counties and the state legislators and everything else was red. The majority of the governors was red. What happened? The whole red. And people were literally screaming bloody murder. Nothing changed.
Nothing.
A sea of red and nothing changed. Again.
Yeah.
Nothing was so, I don't understand. This divorce. Like when people say, "Oh, we just need to get this conservative or this conservative," I'm like, well, and now the conservatives and the left want to say we need this divorce. Well, what does it matter? Who cares if we get Trump in the White House? Who cares if we have a sea of red? What's going to change? Why, to the leftists or to the conservatives that wanted a divorce? Well, what does it matter? Because nothing's going to change. Nothing changes. It doesn't matter. The left always gets what it wants.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Listen, we have Reagan in power, who's admired by many conservatives, and I like Ronald Reagan. I think he was a decent man. Despite all the talk, the culture and the political system went further to the left. Yeah, he got his military buildup and he's got his tax cut. Fine. But the country and the culture went further to the left. We had 2 Bush presidencies, both been governed, in my opinion, left of center. And then, of course, with Trump, it's kind of the same thing. And listen, with Trump, we had record amounts of Republican legislatures at the state level, the House, the Senate, had it all, and nothing effectively got done. George W. Bush also had the House and the Senate at one time. Nothing got done. And yet when we see the left come into power, like with Obamacare, they just ram down their hardcore main principles down everybody's throats, and they're willing to take the temporary consequences at the ballot box. But as we know, once they get their programs entrenched in government, they never go away. That's why Obamacare.
But always the conservatives' programs always get overturned.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And so this is where we're at. If you're the left, I mean, you may want a divorce for your symbolic reasons. Maybe the country's not going fast enough to the left, but you're getting everything you want, and you've been getting everything you want. There's no reason for the leftists to ever fear, to be honest with you, because Republicans are cowards. Nobody wants to fight back. The conservatives have surrendered on the culture war and all this other stuff. So it's amazing. But Julie, I think from a conservative perspective, or at least a right-wing perspective, I keep hearing there's a bunch of good old boys down in Texas that are ready to pick up their guns, and basically Texas on its own has the infrastructure to declare itself a state and go at it on its own. Well, I mean, Texas, I keep hearing Texas here, man.
Well, Texas can't go on its own if half the state loses its electricity. Uh, I mean, if Texas becomes its own country, what's it going to do? Call up the United States and be like, hey, we're having problems. Can you help us out? No, you decided to go on your own. I
Yeah,
mean,
I know. They're ready to go war with the federal government, but they can't keep the lights on during a freeze over there, ironically enough. So
I mean, so it's just like, well, they have, I guess they have the infrastructure, but I mean, Houston, Dallas, Austin, what are other populous cities? San
yeah,
Antonio. They're all
they're all
blue.
fully blue cities.
They're all blue. So what are you
Yeah,
going to do? So what are you going to do, Texas, when you come your own country and you still keep the same type of way of governing, elections and whatnot? Well, the cities are just going to control everything, and then you're going to have the same exact problem.
yeah,
And again, militarily, the majority of the military bases are owned by the United States government. So if Texas just, let's just go with the scenario that Texas secedes from the Union and becomes its own country, the the United States government with its 49 states, let's just say that Texas is the only one that leaves in its 49 states. Well, those military bases are the property of the United States of America. They're not property of Texas. And so Texas doesn't have access to those military bases anymore. It's just like when the United States has military bases on on foreign soil. Those military bases are the property of the United States, and effectively it's a little country that belongs to the United States. So Texas military will be cut in half. So, they can say that they have all these military things, but once they go on their own, they won't have access to it, because even if you do keep friendly relations with the United States, if Texas decides to go to war, or the United States decides to go to war with Texas, you still won't have access to those military bases.
yeah, yeah. And I think, Julia, the biggest problem you have here, let's assume you get your divorce, right? And you become your own little independent red state. Then what? What are your first principles? Are you going to double down on what? The Enlightenment Constitution 2.0? The very principles that got us here in the first place? I mean, this is the problem I'm having here. We're here for a reason, and this hasn't all collapsed by accident right now. There's been some fundamental philosophical principles that were flawed, have been flawed for a long time. The biggest of which, you have no acknowledgement of the one true triune God. You have no moral arbiter of truth. You've left everybody individually to pick and choose their own personal moral codes. And now that the culture is falling apart, the family is already destroyed, you find yourself in a position where the political system is abjectly corrupt. What's going to stop that from happening at the state level? Even if you
Well,
break away, what are your principles?
I think what you haven't really mentioned, but you touched tangentially on,
Yeah,
is that all of this divorce talk is for social and economic reasons. For the right and conservatives, it's for economic reasons, but it's also for not wanting to be canceled. But you're not going to try and, say that single motherhood is not a good thing. People shouldn't be shacking up outside of marriage or any of these types of things. It's also, you can have your conservatism and no consequences of being canceled. And well, what the left wants is not to have to deal with the so-called bigots and all this other stuff. But it has nothing to do with morals or ethics. It's all purely social and economic, with no real religion thrown in, but except the secular religion.
yeah. And the irony is, we're a broken culture that is morally collapsing. See, that's the issue that I have here. Nobody wants to deal with the moral dilemma, which is what is at the crisis of this civilization right now. And we see it every day. right? When you talk about different victim groups or, that have morally collapsed and want their sins justified, that's one of the great battles that's going on right now, whether it's with Dave Chappelle or whatever it may be. The right is pulling their hair out because of the cancel culture. But when you look at it, it's all moral depravity in the end. But nobody wants to talk about that in the end, Julian.
Well, of course. I mean, what are the conservatives doing about the culture? Nothing.
Nothing.
What are conservatives doing about religion? Nothing.
Nothing.
Every single thing has has bent the knee to leftism and liberalism and progressivism, whether it's cultural institutions that are not religious institutions or whether it's religious institutions. Everything has bent the knee to the left, whether it's mainline Protestant churches or huge swaths of the Catholic Church or, colleges, or just everything has become enculturated with leftism and liberalism.
Yeah, it's interesting because remember, during that presidential run between Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush, there was that famous line, where they said, "It's the economy, stupid." And what is interesting about that is that the economy has been kind of running along now in America because we're printing money left and right, and we're kind of propping up the economic system. But if you look at how the left has attacked the past, really, well, 30, 40, 50 years, it hasn't been via economics. It's been through the culture. It's gone after cultural issues. It's gone after moral issues. I mean, when you look at the universities today, particularly this millennial generation now that's soon going to come into power, the whole liberal white guilt factor has been a major turning point in this country's history, where because of sort of the redefinition of moral standards, we're all living with this guilt in our heart, and a lot of it has to do with moral issues, and especially those sins
I really have to say something, and I really want to get on my bird box about this
Okay.
white guilt. I'm not white. If you look at my picture, I'm not white.
No, you're
But
not.
but I cannot stand white guilt. It drives me insane with a passion.
Yeah.
I cannot believe I am living in a time where where people, whether it's white liberal women or old white men, or it's a bunch of screaming angry black people just screaming about how the white man this, the white man that, or white women talking about how white men are bad, or white men talking about how he needs to shut up and listen to everybody else, to the white woman, to the black woman. It's just like, give me a freaking break.
Yeah.
Honestly.
And listen, I don't know who defines the terms of condition in regards to what constitutes white, what constitutes black, what constitutes Hispanic, but I'm of Sicilian origin. I'm 100% full-blooded Sicilian, and I don't consider myself white in that respect because
Right.
the Sicilian Peninsula it's the ultimate, in pluralism throughout its history. So I know my blood is very mixed, and that's why when I see those of, I guess you want to call them, of the Anglo-Saxon tradition sort of bend over backwards to sort of escape this guilt, I almost feel embarrassed for them. And I've seen a lot of it in universities. It's embarrassing to watch these people, Julian.
It is. It is embarrassing. It's embarrassing. As I've talked about, privately with other people, with you, and I've mentioned in other videos and other interviews that, during the whole, summer of fire, summer of George Floyd, I was ashamed to be a black man in this country because of what was going on. Not not because what happened to George Floyd, but the fact that this country literally burned cities to the ground, billions of dollars in damages, a literal city block seceded from the United States because some man died in police custody brutally. And then you wanted to already vilify the police officer. He didn't get a fair trial because when he already went into court, they already judged him guilty. It's just, people have used George Floyd for all of these evil machinations, and primarily it's rich white people, race hustlers,
Yeah.
and other Marxist leftists in my mind, on the plantation, entitled black people who just want to be angry at the world. And it's just like, I cannot believe that I'm associated with you people by the color of my skin. I am ashamed of, I am just absolutely, I want to put my head down because that is how ashamed that I am. And I haven't done anything wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm ashamed because, this is not a good look. When you are associated, it doesn't matter if you're Italian, Jewish, black, whatever. It's just the way of the world. But when you are part of a group, you not only represent yourself and your family, you represent that group too.
Yeah. Well, what I will say, Julian, what we saw with George Floyd was horrible. It was definitely a crime against the man, and may God rest, save his soul and all that good stuff there. But I don't think you have anything to be ashamed about. Neither do any Black Americans. I think what we see in the streets of America, and this is where the disconnect is from the political right, when I keep saying that there's a disconnect between sort of their ideology and the reality on the ground, is I think we've seen lots of politically correct movement, activist movements, Marxist movements that have paid actors of sorts, I guess you want to say, to show outrage in the streets of America, to use the guilt card of civil rights. I don't attribute what I see in the cities, whether it's the burning of cities or the violence in the city, I don't attribute that to all Black people or all Hispanic people or all white people. Those kind of generalizations are always tough to me. But I think the reality is that, as we Catholics have learned now, and as we Catholics have been talking about now for a couple hundred years, and as we've experienced through Masonic infiltration into the church, remember, we were all called conspiracy kooks at one time for suggesting, right? But we see that, and this is what I keep telling my classical liberal friends who don't like this kind of talk, because once you go down the path of like infiltration and these elements of conspiracy, their ideological vision of America breaks down. They don't want to get into this, right? And what I'm saying to you is we Catholics have experienced this infiltration. If they have infiltrated the Catholic Church, I guarantee you they've infiltrated government, media, education systems, everything. I think what we see on the streets in Black communities oftentimes is not the Black community. It's infiltrators that are there. Julian, I think people are bought and paid for to act outraged in front of a camera to keep this narrative of guilt alive in America. And it's not just here, it's all of the West. We've seen this.
Oh, yeah, by far. I mean, I said this during the Summer of Fire. I mean, everybody was enraged about the lockdowns. Everybody, right, left, it don't matter. The lockdowns were becoming they were becoming outrageous. It was becoming a kill or be killed type of situation during some of these lockdowns. And what did the media do?
Yeah.
It brought out its tried and true racism.
That's right. Yeah.
And then what happened? Once again, everybody was no longer all up in arms about the lockdowns or all up in arms about, somebody's racist. Everybody's racist. And then everybody's back in their corners again, not shaking hands about like, hey, I don't like you, you don't like me, but this lockdown is crazy. Let's be mad about that together. No, if you're a racist, you're a racist. Let's go over here and, be mad at each other again.
Yeah, listen, Jim, I was born and raised in LA. And when I was growing up as a kid, hanging out at the boys' club, most of my friends were Black. I have great sympathies for the Black community. And I sympathize with their struggles in many ways too. But my issue here is I believe that many blacks in those communities are being misled by a media and a
Hmm.
narrative that's been created by political forces. And listen, I'll say that for white people too, or whatever race you want to pick. We're all being misled at this point in time by a mainstream media and an educational system right now that's trying to again co-opt us into some Marxist utopia. So
That's also
listen,
another thing is what are these
yeah,
conservatives or the leftists have the media in their pocket,
right.
but what about so how do the conservatives think this is going to play out in the media if there's going to be an amicable divorce? Do you think the media is going to be okay
Yeah,
with this?
yeah, and I guess to get back to the point of this amicable divorce here, um, I first of all, let's talk about the reality of this happening because I think this is more frustration. This is more bloviating by the right. We know the Marxists are never once they got their foot on your neck, they're never going to take it off. There's no simple, easy divorce here, right? 39.95 and no contest divorce here. If you truly want a separation from the left in America, you better be prepared to fight a civil war, a bloody civil war. You better be prepared to sacrifice your sons, your daughters, your careers, your property, everything you've ever worked for in your life. You better be prepared to lose all of it now. And the question we have to ask ourselves, why have we reached this point? And have we reached a point of no return? I know many conservatives are frustrated. I'm frustrated, right? We're living in a completely morally degenerate society. The economic system now is completely corrupt in this usury system that nobody trusts the political system anymore. I understand the frustration. But if all you're going to tell me is let's double down on the founding principles 2.0, I'm just like, okay, what's that going to do us? That's what got us here, Julian.
I think the bravest thing we can do now is look the truth in the face. And the truth
Yeah.
in the face is that there is no amicable divorce. And if you do divorce, and are, if that's going to be your talking point now, if that's going to be all your energy, whether it's Glenn Beck, Ben Shapiro, or whoever, all these talking classes on the right, then you have to admit that America has failed.
Yeah.
That's the truth of the matter. If you want to divorce, then America has failed.
Yeah.
And so not only that, you lose. So I honestly don't think what do they think is going to happen, because some states just just on a resource, because of where they're located at by nature, just will not be economically viable.
Yeah.
And so you are setting that state up for failure because it doesn't have resources.
No.
That's the name of the game of any country. That's why some countries are better than others. It's not because they conquered it or whatever. A long time ago, a group of people all migrated to this landmass, to whatever landmass they were at. They spread out, then they called it their country, and then they realized that it had all these natural resources, and then it allowed them to become prosperous. That's nature. That's the design of God. That
Yeah.
not all nature is equally doled out to everybody. So I mean, in Nevada, half this Las Vegas, it has all of its water brought in. I mean, so if Nevada becomes its own state, like what's going to happen if most of its water supply is in another country? Is that country going to allow you to keep bringing in water from
Yeah.
taking water away
Well,
from them?
let me present an even more difficult problem that I've been talking about, and that is we've also had a federal government that's been encroaching more and more of its power into the states. And I'm going to tell you guys right now, are you ready to give up your Social Security check if you break away from the federal government? Are you ready to give up your Medicare benefits, your education subsidies, your military protection from the government? I mean, go down all these sort of entrenched government programs that prop up a lot of these states, and there's a lot of serious questions to ask. And when you have a population in this economic usury system where nobody owns their land. Let's remember, when the Revolutionary War happened in America, that was an agricultural society. People owned their land. They were somewhat self-sufficient at the time. They could take care of themselves. That's not our country anymore. We're not agricultural. Most people don't even own their homes, never mind a plot of land to be able to take care of themselves and their families. There's nowhere for them to go back to. What are you going to promise these people? You break away? Are you going to break the usury banking system and take the land away from the elites in order to give it to the people so they can actually take care of themselves? Because they're going to lose their Medicare. They're going to lose their Social Security. They're going to lose their government jobs, their union federal government jobs. You're going to lose everything here. What are the promises in return so people can take care of themselves, even if you win this war? There's lots of questions. And this is why there won't be a civil war. Because I keep telling people, the federal government takes care of at least 50% of its population via certain programs. We are a nation, we are a service sector economy. We don't know how to take care of ourselves, Julian. We haven't known how to take care of ourselves for at least 100 years, ever since the Industrial Revolution. This thing is not as simple as many people want to believe. I keep telling you, get out of your ideological prism and look at reality on the ground. We don't own anything. We have no power, Julian.
Yeah, I think what I think the left and the right is not seeming to or is overlooking is that if it's a civil war, it's not going to be like it was during the American Civil War, where it's the North against the South. It's going to be neighbor against neighbor.
Yeah.
It's going to even be family member against family member, because we are so polarized. We don't have a unifying culture. You don't have a bunch of Irish people with the Irish, Scottish with the Scottish, English with the English. You have everybody mixing and mingling, and you have no shared culture, no shared values.
Right.
Everybody is, there's no unifying religious values. There's none of those things that happened during the revolutionary times. There's none of those things that happened during the American Civil War. All of those things were built in. All of these people typically stayed within their own culture, even though they were part of the general culture that was the United States or the colonies. But today you have within a generation, your own children who are leftists and you're a conservative.
Yeah.
Back during the Civil War and the Revolution, you didn't have politics like that within the same family, at least within the immediate generation.
Yeah.
You didn't send your kids off to college and then they just all of a sudden, or they look at you as if you're some old fuddy-duddy who doesn't know anything, and that they're somehow better than you because they went to college. Oh, well, you went to college, but that was 50 years ago. I went to college now, and my professor talks about critical race theory and all these other claptrap nonsense. It's just like, again, what is this divorce going to look like? Because it will not be a smooth break.
It's ideological. It's a bunch of talk radio hosts. It's a bunch of internet bloggers that are having these grand visions of this conservative utopia because they've lost control. They've lost control of the republic. The republic that they promised us was going to be better than the old world, Julian. That's part of the issue. I think there's lots of guilt, that there's a lot of failure to go around. Now, listen, like I've told you before, I love this country and I have everything at stake here, just like I'm sure you do as well, too. We live here, Julian. We got to work here. We got to raise families here. We got to survive here. So in that sense, there's got to be a sense of hope. And I want America to succeed. I want it because we need it to succeed. The question is, how do we move forward now? And I think this is the problem that the right-wingers have, is that they're doubling down on the very same principles that got us here in the first place. And that is these abstract ideas of the Enlightenment, rather than latching on to eternal truth, sacred tradition, the 2,000-year analogy of the faith, where our ancestors actually got a few things right. And what I will add, Julian, and what I will add this is that I think at the core root of liberalism, all of liberalism, we see it especially in progressivism, but what we see in the classical liberal movement is their inability to be governed, to have any authoritarian rule over them. Never mind the monarch. Okay, I get they're anti-monarchical. I get they're anti-authoritarian government, but they never even wanted the church. A church that at times, in regards to moral principles, says, no, you can't do that. And if you look at the history of classical liberalism and ultimately Protestantism, a lot of that has to do with sins below the belt, Julian.
Yeah, I mean, you just made me remember a video that I watched. I believe it was by a YouTuber. No, I don't believe it was by a YouTuber. I'm just trying to remember if it was Ways of the World or Black Pigeon Speaks. But one of them talks about how the inheritors of the Enlightenment are the I think how he put it was the inheritors, the true inheritors of the Enlightenment are the demisexual, trans, gay, LGBT, whatever nonsense, is because the birth of all of this, what we are going through now, is during the Enlightenment. And it has come to fruition now. And what are these conservatives going to do if they break away and they still allow all of these other disparate, sexual things to go on? I mean, we were talking about Bush 2 earlier. Texas overturned its sodomy laws, I believe, under Bush 2. So, if you become your own country again, are you going to put sodomy laws back on the books? I don't think so. I mean, but it's a good thing that you have the heartbeat bill. But are you going to just say abortion is just not even the heartbeat bill? It's just abortion is just a no. If abortion is no. It don't matter if there's no heartbeat bill. It's just no abortion. I mean, what are you going to do? Because all of these conservative states have allowed all of these things culturally and politically to be just rammed down onto them. So what are you going to do if you go your own way? Nothing.
Yeah. And I think that's the big question. What does this divorce look like at this point in history? I get the frustration on the right. I completely understand it. The country looks nothing like it did just 20, 30, 50 years ago, never mind going all the way back to the founding. I think there's a lot of serious questions we Americans have to ask ourselves. Like I said earlier, I had a friend of mine who loves this country just like I do, but a real classical liberal in love with America, its historical dictates and everything it stands for, tell me, Frank, I don't know how we don't say at this point we're not an evil nation anymore. And I think that's very telling, because I think a lot of classical liberals are starting to come to that realization that there's some fundamental problems in America. Julian, my friend, your final thoughts.
Well, I think my final thoughts is that this country is evil. I mean, during the 2020 elections, they had on Time magazine Pete Buttigieg running, saying the future president of the United States. Although that didn't happen, the fact that a man with his alternative lifestyle is even in a position to run, allowed to run, should say all you need to say about this country.
Yeah, well, I won't go so far as to say that it's evil, but I will say that there's problems here without a doubt, and it lends itself to evil in many ways. Again, all the mortal sins that was condemned by our ancestors are all now legalized, endorsed, celebrated, funded, and shipped overseas. We can't ignore that fact anymore, and all these sins are always masked by a rubber stamping the word liberty over the word sin. I think it's very telling that Christ was never mentioned in the Constitution of the United States. I think it's very telling. The Constitution never even mentions the word sin, or does it ever even attempt to deal with our fallen nature. I think as Americans, we have a lot to look in the mirror, look ourselves in the mirror first and foremost, and we owe ourselves the truth at the very least. And I think being hampered down by these ideological movements between the left and the right, I think is one of the grand mistakes we continue to make. Because as we've seen, there's only one ideology that continues to win, and that is the far left. And the ideology on the right continues to lose. I'm not in favor of a divorce at this point. I think, as much as I hate the whole fight, fight, fight thing that the right talks about, there is some truth to it. There is some truth. But I think the fight has to be at a spiritual level and not at a political level. I think politically it's done. I think the only way to fix this thing is to fix the faith first and foremost, which means we have to talk about true religion and not abstract religion like American religious liberty, but true principles of religion. And we have to work on this culture, and then the politics will settle itself. I don't believe America is evil, but I do believe that the entities, the institutions have been captured by evil as well too. America is a nation with lots of good and decent people, hardworking people, people that are patriotic and love their country, good and decent people. There's a lot of them in America, Julian. And all I'll say is that those are the people that are being hurt the most right now. We have an elitist movement that's monopolizing power and the means of production. And you're only going to see these divisions continue to grow as more and more people are being left out. The American dream is being wiped out before our very eyes. Julian, my friend, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank once again Julian DeMarco of the May He Rain vlog. Make sure you check out his site. I put the link in the description here. We've also opened up our own page over on Odyssey as well too. Here, frankly speaking, I'm working on that in the process. I'm going to try and get up as many different platforms as we can, just in case some of the censors don't like what we're saying on some of these YouTube videos. Want to be prepared to keep this show running long term. And I want to thank you for joining us. This is Frank signing off for Frankly Speaking. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.